Planning Commission, February 26, 2018. Today we're scheduled for deliberations and action on the Town Place Suites remand. We're going to read a brief description of this remand, and then we'll open it up for staff and the commission to discuss. As I said, my name is John Borowski, and I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. First, could we ask all of the commissioners to introduce themselves, please?
Rita Colello, Vice Chair.
Kristen Taylor.
They don't work. John Jaworski.
Bill Randall.
Steve Baker.
Okay, thank you. Today we'll be discussing the remand of an application known as Eugene Town Place Suites, City File WG 16-1, SR 16-1, and ARB 16-3. Planning Commission's decision about this remand will be the final city decision on this matter, as we have until April 6th to reach a decision on this application. We will begin deliberations and possibly take action today. If there are any appeals of the Planning Commission's decision, they go to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. Before we begin, because this is a quasi-judicial land use application, now is the time for planning commissioners to disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte communications, biases, or to abstain from the discussion or decision. Each planning commissioner must disclose and describe the substance of any communication they have had about this application outside the public process. The planning commissioners must also disclose any possible conflicts of interest, that is, whether the decision they are about to make could or would result in personal financial gain to themselves, their relatives, or business with which the commissioners or the commission's relative is associated. Finally, a planning commissioner cannot participate if he or she is biased. That is, for whatever reason, he or she is incapable of rendering an objective decision on this application. Do any commissioners have any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts to disclose? I just want to put out onto the record that we did have a pre-meeting about this, but it was with staff, and it was just to go over the particulars of the agenda and how this meeting is going to be run. And also, just for the record, I know that two of the parties that are involved here are hotels. I am a board member of the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. I just want to put that out there. I don't believe that will bias my decision in any way. Okay, so any other commissioners want? All right, does anybody else in the audience or a member of the commission wish to challenge the impartiality of any of the planning commissioners? Seeing none, staff presentation. We will begin with a brief presentation from staff. Lauren Sumners, Assistant City Attorney, and Althea Sullivan from Planning will provide information about the procedural matters and the application at hand. There we go.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name's Althea Sullivan, as it was just mentioned. I'm going to pull up a slideshow that was already shown, just to remind us all of where the site is and what it generally looks like, because it's been a little bit. So today we're talking about a remand of an application for a site review, adjustment review, and a Willamette Greenway permit. The request was originally submitted in 2016, and the request was to construct a 4-story, 101-room hotel. And that's just a vicinity map of the site. The area that's outlined in red is the property that the hotel would be placed on. The hearings official originally denied the application, and as this is a remand and the Land Use Board of Appeals provided specific direction, I'm only going to talk about the single thing that it was remanded for. I'm not going to go back over the entire application or anything else with it. So one of the issues that the hearings official denied the application based on was compliance with Eugene Code 7.280. And that section of the code, the full text is in your agenda item summary. But put simply, if you have a street near your property, if you're building a street, you need to put street trees on it, show street trees or propose those. And the hearings official said that there was not evidence in the record that showed that that code criterion could be met. Following the hearings official's denial, there was an appeal to the Planning Commission. And before the Planning Commission, it was argued that there was evidence in the record that showed that that code criterion, Eugene Code 7.280, could be met or could be met with a condition. The Planning Commission determined that it did not apply, and part of that was because there's not a new street being proposed with this application. There's just existing streets around it, and if you look back on the vicinity map here, so you can see Delta Highway here, and you can see sort of this line of trees. That's the area we're talking about, and the question of whether or not there needed to be a street tree plan or a street tree permit for that particular area of the site. And so when it was in front of the Planning Commission, it was decided that you didn't need a street tree plan for that area or its approved street tree agreement. The decision of the Planning Commission was appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, and then that's where the remand has come from. And it was very specific. I'm just going to read it because it's short and specific. And the Land Use Board of Appeals said that on remand, the Planning Commission must determine whether, consistent with intervener's filed appeal statement that took the position that evidence in the record demonstrates that Eugene Code 7.280 is met, the hearings official erred in determining that there is not sufficient evidence to show that it's met. So today, put simply in just one simple question, what we're here to talk about is whether or not there's evidence in the record to show that Eugene Code 7.280 is met. That's the question that we're trying to, well, that you all are trying to answer. Again, the full text is in your agenda, and when staff originally provided our recommendation to you, what we were looking at was a plan sheet titled C110 Tree Preservation Plan. And we thought that that plan sheet showed that the criterion was met. And the reason for that is that the Eugene Code defines street trees as being living, having a diameter at breast height of 6 inches, and are in the right-of-way. So on that plan sheet, there are several trees, and I believe there's 13 trees that all meet that definition of a street tree that are shown on that plan. And so we thought that while it was a little bit strange to have a sheet titled Tree Preservation Plan, it does show the information that we thought could be considered a tree plan. But again, it's titled a Tree Preservation Plan, and we're not clear on what it was intended to be. Well, I suppose it was intended to be a tree preservation plan, and so it's not clear that it was intended to also be a street tree plan. And so since we provided this AIS and recommendation, we thought about it a bit more, and so there's some draft motions in front of you as the top sheet, but under those there are 2 revised draft final orders. The first of those, which has the yellow tab on it, provides a condition, and that's because if the label of the sheet C110 is intended to just be a tree preservation plan and wasn't intended to be a street tree plan, a condition could be used to fix that. I guess I'll stop there and say we've sort of changed our recommendation a bit. We think that that condition could be used if the title of the plan seems like it's not clear that it could be a street tree. And do you have anything else to add, Lauren or Gabe?
I do. Thank you. Yeah. So I want to just expand a little bit on the process that Althea just talked about and talk a little bit more about kind of how we find ourselves where we are today. So as Althea mentioned, this is a quasi-judicial application on remand from LUBA. And consequently, because this is a remand, and especially because of the direction that we got from LUBA, the remand issue before you today is very narrow. So really all we are looking at is there evidence in the record to show that either the street tree criterion of approval is met or could be met with a condition of approval. To expand on the history a little bit, because I think that's informative for this application, before the hearings official, the applicant argued the street tree criterion was not applicable to them at all because they were not creating a new street. The hearings official disagreed with that and said, no, I think the criterion is applicable and I don't think there's enough evidence in the record to show that it's met. The applicant appealed to the Planning Commission, and before the Planning Commission, the applicant did not argue that the criterion was not applicable at all. Instead, the applicant argued that there was either enough information in the record to show that the criterion was already met, or Planning Commission could impose a condition of approval to ensure that that criterion was met. Applicant did not argue criterion doesn't apply at all. Planning Commission, on appeal, looked at the hearings official's decision and decided that Planning Commission disagreed with the hearings official and thought that the criterion was not applicable because there was not a creation of a new street. So Planning Commission, on appeal, said, yeah, criterion does not apply. That decision was appealed to LUBA, and LUBA said, Planning Commission, sorry, you are bound by the appeal issues that are presented to you. And the appeal issue was either criterion is already met based on evidence in the record, or criterion could be met based on condition of approval. You didn't have the option to say criterion is not applicable because that was not in the appeal issues that were before you. So that's why it's coming back to you today. LUBA has said you need to base your decision on the appeal issue, which means either criterion is met or could be met with a condition. So that is the scope of your conversation today. It's a pretty narrow scope. I also want to point out, I think Althea mentioned, but to kind of double down, the record in this matter is currently closed. Because the remand issue was so narrow, the record has not been reopened, and also because LUBA kind of specifically said to the Planning Commission, go back, look at the record and determine whether the criterion is met or could be met with a condition. The record has not been reopened on remand. So currently you are limited to the record that is in front of you. As a Planning Commission, you have the authority to reopen the record if that's something that you feel like you need to either evidence and argument, or just argument if you're looking at what's in front of you and don't feel like you have enough to make a decision. That is a possibility, but based on the way that the remand was structured, the record is currently closed. So you're not going to hear from the applicant today, you're not going to hear from anyone else. All you have is the information that is currently in front of you, unless you decide to reopen the record. If you were to decide that, and that is your prerogative, I would remind you that there's some process that goes along with that. We would need a new notice, we would need another date, and as Althea mentioned, I think, and it's certainly in your packet, this decision has to be made on or before April 6th, I believe. So there's some time, but not a lot of time between now and then. And then, kind of as Althea alluded to, you know, when I'm looking at this application and at the remand that LUBA has sent back to you, what I see are sort of a spectrum of options for the Planning Commission. On the one end, you could look at the record and determine that you don't think the condition is met, that there's not enough information in the record to determine that, I'm sorry, I said condition, the criterion is met. You could determine you're not sure if the criterion is met, but you think it can be met with a condition of approval. You could say, looking at the evidence in the record, based on staff's recommendation, we do find that the criterion is met, even though there's nothing entitled a street tree plan. There's enough information in the record that we feel comfortable that the information provided by the applicant is legally sufficient to constitute a street tree plan. Or you could say, we think that the criterion is met. We think that there's enough information in the record to determine that the information provided was equivalent to a street tree plan. But since there's nothing in the record that's actually called a street tree plan, we'd also like to impose a condition that just says to the applicant, go get your street tree plan. Those are the options as I see them. Normally, I would say, if you make a finding that a criterion is met, you would not also impose a condition, because a criterion is either met or it's not. In this case, however, I think there's maybe a little bit more room to maneuver to say, we think the criterion is met in that we think there's enough information to find that there's the equivalent of a street tree plan. However, we don't have a document called a street tree plan, so we'd like the applicant to go and make that happen. So those are the Planning Commission's options for decision, as I see them. That's all I have to say now, but obviously I'm available for questions.
Okay, so at this point, I would like to put it out for questions about the presentation that staff had, and then we'll go into deliberations after that. Commissioner Jaworski.
I was looking at reading something, and I just happened to glance up when you were pointing, because I seem to be confused. You were pointing to the east side of the project, and I thought that we weren't considering Delta Highway because we were told that was ODOT, and that wasn't considered a street. I haven't seen any language that you submitted in this narrative that either describes it's on the east side. I was assuming that that unlabeled thing might have been what you were talking about on the west side. So you are talking about Delta Highway on the east side.
That's correct.
And I thought the definition was more for neighborhoods and street tree planning, not on a major highway. I don't see trees on a major highway. I'm confused, is what I'm really confused there about a requirement along a highway.
So I think I'll just, I understand the confusion. But we have specific direction from the Land Use Board of Appeals that says we have to answer, or I guess you all are tasked with answering the question about trees along the highway. So I don't know.
Well, I don't think it ever said highway. It said abutting. It referred to abutting. I reread that, and I don't remember it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked that question. I don't remember it saying that we're talking in reference to the fact of it's on the highway. Is it in there? I'll check that. I just want to clarify that because I got really confused on that when from what we had been told before about ODOT, and that's not a street.
And I think that was part of, and this is where I'll say I've sort of picked this up. I think Eric was originally the planner, so I've looked through the record on it. I've watched some of the meetings, but I'm probably not as familiar with exactly what was said at the meeting or what the thought was originally. But I do know that question of, do you have to put street trees along what's essentially a highway, was maybe part of the decision that it didn't apply.
I'm looking at the highway map right here, and there's no street trees anywhere as you go all the way up that highway north that you can see. I'm confused. I thought street trees, as the definition indicated, were for neighborhoods. I don't consider a highway being a neighborhood, so that's where I was confused. Okay, so I'll remain confused. Let me ask just two quick questions, and you alluded to it in your presentation. Is a street tree plan a diagram or a narrative, or both, or either? That's what I couldn't find anything when it talks about a street plan being required, what it is that constitutes a street plan.
That's a good question, Commissioner Dorsey. I'm not sure whether that information is currently in the record. I think that it may not be, because originally the applicant's argument was that those street tree requirements didn't apply at all, so I'm not sure whether they made them into the record.
I'm not talking about the record, I'm just saying, since it referenced the street tree and all of that, is there anything in there, as a lawyer would look at it, that would say what would be required in submitting? I couldn't see anything, so that's why I'm asking the question from a legal eye point.
Did you look at page 46 in the record, in the packet? It has more details there. I think that will.
Yeah, I read all that. What I'm saying is, if you were a lawyer reading this, does any of this, in a way that I couldn't see, say what would be required? I couldn't see anything that describes what is required.
In the code, you're saying?
Yeah, in 7.280.
I don't believe that the code gets into the specifics of what a street tree plan looks like. The city has adopted an administrative rule that talks about what that application looks like. And
Okay. Final question is, when you're looking at neighborhoods, when you're looking at trees and planting, are there any rules or regulations that talk about spacing? I couldn't get a spacing. I know when they planted on our street where our neighborhood was built, they had so much of a spacing between the trees was required. Is that something that might be required in this?
I don't believe it's in the code.
Okay.
Again, but it may be addressed by the administrative rule.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Randall.
Okay. I guess first, I agree with Commissioner Jaworski that as far as the freeway being a street or not, and I think it's not so much confusion as it is, I think Luba got it wrong. I don't think it's a street. But that said, I'm not interested in, beating a dead horse. And so I guess my question is, I think similar to that, as far as if we were to approve with or without conditions, I'm leaning toward maybe without. I guess maybe that's getting ahead of myself. I guess my question would be, the tree preservation plan being acceptable as a street tree plan, does it help with kind of the belt and suspenders on everything to require it to be a street tree plan? Or can we get that specific? Or, can we just say resubmit C-110A as a street tree plan?
I think so, Commissioner Randall, I think in your packet there's a draft decision that includes a proposed condition. Is that?
It wasn't in the
I think
So it's not
sorry,
in
not
the
in the packet.
packet.
It's on this, okay.
Look at the back of, it has a yellow sticky tab on it. And it does have a proposed condition there, and I'll just read it. It says that as required by Eugene Code 7.2803, building permits for the hotel shall not be issued until the city approves a street tree plan consistent with Eugene Code 7.280 and the city's street tree program administrative rule R-7.280 adopted by administrative order, and then I won't read the numbers there.
Okay. So I guess
that
my
would be
question would that,
Staff's proposed language for a condition that it basically just says, applicant, go get a street tree plan approved consistent with the code and admin rule requirements. So-
okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
I put myself in the queue, and one of my questions is going to be, if we were to take notice of that section of the code that Althea just mentioned, the administrative rule R 7.280, would that be opening the record?
It was submitted by Attorney Close as part of the record.
Not the administrative rule. Not code number, R-72.0.
Right, and I don't believe,
And
commissioners, you do not have a copy of the administrative rule in front of you.
No,
You
we don't have,
some-
we just have the,
That's why but it was referenced as in section 2 of the standards. And so I'm just wondering if we want to look at that and take notice of it, would that constitute opening the record?
Commissioner Borowski, no, I think that an adopted administrative rule by the city of Eugene is something that the planning commission can take official notice of, and that does not constitute reopening the record. However, I guess my follow-up question to you, and it's not a legal question, is does that really aid you in your deliberations or discussion today? It's something that you can look at. I don't know if that kind of moves your decision forward or not.
So the answer to your question is kind of gets to Commissioner Jaworski's. That administrative rule basically goes through and tells what a street tree plan is. It tells what the fees are. It tells how far apart your trees have to be. It tells the watering requirements, all that type of stuff. So that's in my condition, that may help me to determine whether or not the condition had been met. So, and at some point, I may ask the commission to decide whether or not they would like to.
Just to clarify, Commissioner Borowski,
Yeah.
I think this is what you meant, but I want to make
Sure.
sure. In terms of determining whether you want to impose a condition, it doesn't, if the condition that you're imposing is just to tell the applicant, hey, go get a street tree plan that's consistent with the code and the administrative rule, I don't know how much you need to delve into the administrative rule. If you are looking at the administrative rule to determine whether you think the tree preservation plan that is currently in the record meets
That, yeah.
street tree plan requirements, maybe it would be, maybe it wouldn't, but in terms of imposing a condition, I'm not sure that it would be super helpful.
No, I'm not using it to, the question that I have on remand from LUBA is the requirement that a street tree plan be in the record, is that condition met? And for me, looking at that administrative rule will help me to make the determination whether that was met. Going further, as far as what the next step is, it has nothing to do with it.
Okay, and I just want to clarify the remand direction one more time too. That is, Lugo is saying, based on the record as it sits before you, have the approval criterion in Eugene Code section 7.28 and 9.2. I'm not going to get the chapter 9, there you go, reference, but is it currently met or could it be met with the condition? And that's it.
Okay. Other questions of staff? Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, a couple of questions here, actually. I'll go back and start here. In the remand from LUBA, as I recall, they remanded based upon the first condition, but then they, I think it was the fourth assignment of merit. I'm trying to find it right now. Where is it? But they said they couldn't really decide on the fourth assignment of error because of the first assignment of error. So, because on remand, the planning commission must determine, consistent with the intervener's field statement, the hearings offer erred in determining that there was not sufficient error in the record to demonstrate that EC 7.280 was met.
Excuse me.
So they didn't consider that fourth assignment of error. Could you sort of elaborate, explain a little bit? And they obviously threw out the first one, and then they said it's up to us to decide whether that was met. Is that what's going on here?
Well, so Commissioner Baker, in the first assignment of error before LUBA, the petitioner argued that the Planning Commission had exceeded its authority by looking beyond the appeal issues identified by the appellant in front of the Planning Commission, the applicant. And LUBA was clear that the Planning Commission had exceeded its authority by saying that the street tree criterion did not apply at all. So then the fourth assignment of error the petitioner argued that the Planning Commission also, not only did it exceed its authority, which was first assignment in error, but even if it didn't, the Planning Commission got it wrong by finding that the applicant didn't need to comply with the street tree criterion. Luba said, we don't have to decide whether Planning Commission got it wrong because Planning Commission exceeded its authority over here. We know that, so we're not going to consider whether you made the right decision. We're going to kick it back to you to say, here's the decision that you have to make, which is different than the decision that you made last time. Here are the outlines of that decision. Please make it within these confines. And then, I mean, if it were appealed again, then Luba would probably get to the second your decision.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then in EC 7.820, looking at under standards, it says the last paragraph, the last two paragraphs, the standards shall include but not be limited to the types of trees that may be planted and the requirements for planting and establishment of the trees. As used in this section, establishment includes watering, initial pruning, and replacement of trees if necessary per period of 3 years from the date of planting. So are you telling me that, based upon your review of the tree preservation plan, that includes this information here on establishment, watering, initial pruning, replacement for 3 years? I mean, first of all, the printing is so small in there, I actually had to bring a magnifying glass to read that. But I didn't find any of that information in there.
So Commissioner Baker, that subsection speaks to we've been calling it the administrative rule. The code refers to it as standards, but those standards are adopted via administrative rule. So the city has put together an administrative rule that talks about lots of things, including watering, pruning, et cetera, of street trees, if and when they are required. And so it may be that under some circumstances, a street tree plan would include this stuff. Under some circumstances, it may not. That's not my bailiwick. I don't know enough to know.
Okay.
But if you choose to impose a condition, that condition would include compliance with the administrative rule, which would include all of these standards if they apply to this particular set of street trees.
And my third and final question is, this particular issue has been kicked back and forth quite a few times now, and it seems to me you could do it in a way that it could be kicked back again. In other words, if the commission found that this drawing C100 complied with the tree preservation plan, that could conceivably be appealed to LUBA again, and then we would be back in the same place. So that's why I'm concerned about even considering that as an option, because it exposes this thing to another potential kickback. So I think, I just wanted to mention that because maybe you have a different take on it than I do.
I just want to be clear that anything can always be appealed to LUBA. So we can't forestall that from happening. But I understand your comments to indicate that you are interested in making a decision that you feel is as likely to be upheld by LUBA as possible.
Defendable.
Yeah. And I mean, that is, I've kind of talked about the suite of options. Sometimes there are decisions where I feel like one is much more defensible than another, and in that case, I will tell you that that is true. Here, I would defer to staff about what they feel is in the record and how solid they feel the record materials are to support a decision that the criterion is met. I think I don't really know enough to know in this situation whether there's a kind of a better decision or a worse decision, except I would defer to staff to talk about what they've seen in the record and how supportive they feel the record materials are of a particular decision.
If I could squeeze in one more quick question.
All right, we've got two other people,
Very short.
other people in the queue as well.
The other question is, I didn't see anywhere in LUBA's decision that they mentioned anything about the west side or the north side of the property in terms of a tree preservation plan.
I think that's accurate. I did not see anything in Luba's decision that
Right.
speaks specifically to the portion
Okay,
of the
just wanted to clarify that that was the case.
Commissioner Nicolao.
Althea, can you review with us how staff reached their recommendation using what's in the record and how you were able to do what you have here before us today? I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, and I suppose I did mention that we are recommending a condition. Is that what you're interested in, or the original recommendation that was in the packet?
I'm interested in the one that's before us today, whichever one you've decided to put more weight behind for your recommendation. How'd you reach that without the administrative order that we've been discussing? And can you kind of help walk us through just that process and that discussion? I think it might be helpful.
Yeah, so we took a look at the record and started looking for anything titled a street tree plan first. We didn't find it, but we did find a plan that has trees on it that meet the definition of a street tree. And so we thought, well, that could be it. That could be a document that could be used to meet that. But with the recommendation that we have right now, we also realize that that item is not titled as a street tree plan, and it does not provide all of the information that maybe is required by the administrative order and the rule. And so that's where the condition is saying that the applicant needs to go and get a street tree plan that's consistent with both the code section and the administrative rule that the code section says, you know, the city can adopt this thing that would then have specifics about how far apart you plant your trees, when you water them. So we're saying right now that they need to go get that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so just if I understand correctly, in your viewpoint, it meets the definition of a street tree as it's established in, is that the Chapter 9 definition?
It is, yes.
And the Chapter 9 definition, but in terms of spacing, in terms of determining watering requirements and all of that, your recommendation is that the applicant takes that second step and actually does their street tree plan as would be required to the administrative order? Correct. Okay.
Commissioner Taylor.
You know, I had the same question, and it's been answered, and I don't know if it's time to make a motion, or if you want to...
We've still got other people in the queue.
Great.
Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I just want to concur with Commissioner Randall. I think that Luba erred here. I don't want it to interfere with this application. I'm worried about the precedents that this will set along any kind of highway of someone having to plant trees. Normally, when you plant street trees and it says in a neighborhood, that's not a neighborhood. I want that clear. And secondly, they usually require sidewalks. There's no sidewalks on Delta Highway. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm worried about a precedent that'll be set that says all these people all of a sudden have to have tree plants and putting them along highways. You know, you can go out West 11, you can go out all these places, you know, you won't maybe see street trees unless they have sidewalks. And I'm really concerned with what's happening here, and I think that one of the things after this is done is maybe staff should look at this about clearing up what that is and what they mean by neighborhood and street trees.
So, Commissioner Jaworski and Commissioner Randall, I want to acknowledge that the Planning Commission is in a little bit of an awkward position here, in part just because of the process that has led us to this point. So, in front of the hearings official, the applicant argued that for a number of the reasons that you're talking about, Commissioner Jaworski, that this criterion should not apply at all. The hearings official disagreed, that the hearings official's decision is in the record, and had, you know, the hearings official had some reasons to disagree, but disagreed, found the criterion did apply, and found that there wasn't enough evidence in the record to find that the criterion had been met. Then when that decision was appealed to the Planning Commission, because of the way the appeal issues were framed for you, the option of finding that the criterion doesn't apply, it is off the table for you. Because of the way that the appeal issues were framed, and because of our code requires that you only consider appeal issues, you are limited to finding either it's met, it's not met, or it can be met with a condition. You don't get to consider whether it applies at all. And so,
Well, I'm
Much
saying
as
I'm
you may.
considering whether or not it sets a precedent.
Commissioner
And that's what I'm
Jaworski,
worried about.
Are we ready to move into deliberations? Because this is starting to touch on that tone. So perhaps.
I'm not touching on the tone, I'm just saying what would
No, it's
happen might be
okay.
a precedent.
I'm just saying, if we're ready, that sounds almost like more deliberations as opposed to questions for staff, so I just wanted to, are we ready for that, or are we still doing questions?
We're still doing questions.
Okay, then let's get back
Okay.
into
Are
it.
you done?
Yes, I'm done.
Commissioner Taylor.
So I wanted to follow through that because based on what you just described, Lauren, it seems to me, and I would love, this is a question, it seems to me that there is actual specific context to this that doesn't necessarily create a precedent or Pandora's box. Because of the hearings official made a decision on appeal, we're restricted to what we can evaluate. In future decisions, isn't there a way to basically, per development proposal, be able to address that and look at conditions and basically somehow make this very exclusive to this particular project? I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are.
I think Commissioner Taylor, in different circumstances, had, for example, on appeal, the applicant continued to argue that this
Yeah.
criteria doesn't apply at all, then that would have been something that the Planning Commission could have considered.
Yeah. So it's really not a unilateral interpretation that then will be passed down to all future development projects, because it seems more context specific, and that's really a question.
I think so. I think it really does hinge on the appeal issues in this case, and future appeals will hinge on the appeal issues as described in those cases.
Okay.
Okay, so at this point, we've got some options in front of us as far as how we want to proceed, whether we want to go through and decide whether the criteria has been met by the information that's in the record is one of the options. The second option is doing that, but imposing conditions. And the third would be just to say that the conditions aren't met and uphold the hearings official's decision. With that being said, does anybody have a preference as to which one they would like to go through first, or if there's a consensus that there's... Commissioner Taylor.
I would like to propose that we consider approved with condition first.
Second.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Who would like to begin? Commissioner Baker.
We're going to vote on it?
We're going to
Moved and
discuss.
seconded?
Yes. It was,
was
I
moved and
seconded.
seconded, yeah.
Now we discuss.
Okay, you don't vote on when someone makes a motion?
Well, I didn't hear it as a motion. I heard of it as discussion. If you want to make it a
Yeah,
formal
I can
motion
make
at
it
this
a-
point,
yeah.
I was just doing it a little bit more informal,
Oh,
just
okay.
discussion.
Okay.
But we can do it as a motion that way if you'd like. It's 6 of one, half dozen to me.
I would,
At some point, we will have to make a motion to do it, but if you want to do it now, we can.
okay, great. I'll change my approach. I would like to put a motion on the table of approving with a condition. I move to amend the portion of the Planning Commission's final order dated September 19th, 2016, entitled Appeal Issue Number 1, Street Tree Requirements, and adopt the findings in the draft final order provided by staff that imposes a condition.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of, well, no, we do
Now we
discuss.
discuss.
Sorry.
And then
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I also think that is a better, more defensible approach, too. I also wanted to cite page 84 in the record. It's attachment D by Commissioner Close. He has some, what I think is useful language in there in a proposed condition. Street tree improvements requirements of EC 2.80 apply to the Valley Riverway and the Delta Highway frontages. And again, I think it's important to mention both of them so that it's clear that it's taken care of. Nowhere in the record does it say I mean, I didn't see a street tree plan for Valley River Way, and maybe there isn't, you know, there's some reasons for that, but that way it's incumbent on the applicant to supply a plan that deals with it. LUBA never mentions the west side or the north side. It just said there was no street tree plan. Or there was no finding that a street tree plan was supplied. So that's why I would be more specific in the language that applies to both sides and then complies.
Commissioner Baker, you, excuse me if I may, you could be more specific. I don't know that it's necessary. The proposed condition already requires the applicant comply with the code requirements and the administrative rule requirements, which will look at, as I understand it, look at the development site and determine where on that site street trees would be required. So I don't know that planning commission needs to make that determination as part of the condition. It will happen as the applicant complies with the condition.
I'm just trying to being as defensible as possible, because, you know, we've gotten in this situation because most of our last discussions were mainly about whether it applied. Sure. And they didn't discuss at all that you know, that there might have been information in the record that complied. You know, almost all of our discussion in our previous administrative setting was whether this rule applied.
And my only concern about making a condition too specific is that sometimes it can be too specific. I'm not sure if that's the case here, but you know, if you identify, for example, 2 streets that need to comply with the street tree plan and you miss one, then all of a sudden the applicant's in kind of an awkward position when they're trying to comply with the code, but the condition only.
Maybe it's more in terms of giving direction, so that we don't have a situation where it comes back to us again.
I put myself in the queue. In response to that, I think that a street tree plan is what is called for in the code, and that's what we need to put in there, that they submit a street tree plan. And I think that I'm fine with this condition of approval. The other thing that concerned me, if we hadn't gone this route, if we had just said that C-110, the street preservation plan, was good enough to be considered a street tree plan, I think that's the Pandora's box that's opened, because then you've got a decision by this commission that a tree preservation plan also can act as a street tree plan, and I didn't want to have that going into the record and as a decision of this body. That's why I'm glad that staff came forward with this plan that basically fits it, will get the development made, will happen per our city code. So I'm in favor of this motion. Commissioner Randall.
Okay. Just wanted to point out as well, in 7.280, 3, right after B, that first paragraph, what helps me feel more comfortable with this is it says existing large-scale street trees on or adjacent to a development site shall be retained unless approved for removal by the city pursuant to section 6300 to 6330 of this code during site development or in conjunction with the street construction project. And I think it does make some concession or that for existing trees as part of a street tree plan. So that makes me feel comfortable with that condition of imposing a plan.
I just consistent. I mean, I thought staff did a great job of putting together the materials today. So it's also, if you look at the definition, which is also an indicator that it's not talking about new or existing. It's just saying a living. A street tree is a living tree.
Mm-hmm. Other discussion? Are we ready to vote on the motion?
May I
Yes.
interject myself for just a moment? Because you have 2 draft final orders in front of you, and the motion as made by Commissioner Taylor, as written and provided to you, just references a draft final order.
Oh, yeah.
by staff.
Thank you.
Could I suggest amending the motion to say draft final order provided, well, that imposes a condition. Never mind, I take it back. I think that's fine, because one of them does impose a condition.
It's the only one that
So we can-
imposes a
So we're looking at
condition,
the
yeah.
yellow one, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Page 1.
Yes, correct. So I rescind my comments. I don't think there's any need to amend the motion.
Now, since we're voting on a 3-page document, does anybody need time to go through it and read it? Or was the staff presented good enough?
I think you all ought to take a minute or two. I want to make sure that we didn't put anything in there on accident or
I appreciate that.
something.
So why don't we take 3 minutes and just go through and read this, and if anything comes up.
Could you point us to exactly where the wording is of the amended text? Because there's a lot of,
Yeah, lots of.
4. Oh, you mean the condition?
Conditions on the last page.
Everything else is basically the same.
4.
We did add,
Oh, but no.
This is already in the packet.
so it's
Okay.
almost entirely the same. There are a couple mentions to
Yeah, I know, I'm just saying.
tree plan notes. So looking on page 3, there's some language.
but the condition would only be this text then?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, it was a little confusing because of some of the wording in the earlier stuff.
Okay, are we, I saw Commissioner Baker had a question.
Yeah, the only thing that I always felt awkward about is I don't think the table should be in there. That table wasn't provided as part of the record, and that's basically staff going through and taking information in there and putting it out in a different way. I don't think we should be putting stuff in that's extractive somehow. To me, it seems like anything that could be construed improperly, I would like to make sure is not.
Okay, so, Nadia has just confirmed for me that you're right, that this information is not formatted in a table in the record, but from a legal perspective, I'm comfortable with staff pulling information from the record and sort of reordering it to put it into a draft final order form. We do that all the time, and that
Kind of what you're doing with those 2 paragraphs there. Yeah, same
that's something
same
that
type of thing.
I don't have any legal concerns about.
Okay,
As long as the underlying information is taken directly from the record, and I believe in this case, that table, the underlying information can be found in the record.
but I don't see how that's needed because we're requiring them to provide a street tree plan, so we don't have to show that may have already partially met this or fully met this. Again, I don't see the need for, all we have to decide is that in order to meet this criteria, they have to provide a street tree plan, and we're saying that they didn't, quote, provide a street tree plan, so they'd have to do another one. So again, I'm confused about why this should be in that.
So I'll let Althea speak to why it was drafted the way it was. I will say this is a draft final order. The commission is not bound by it. You could tell us that you want to do something differently. You could tell us that you'd like to add findings or remove findings. If you want to do that, then we'll need to bring it back to you, so you would not be able to take action today. But that's something that's completely within the commission's prerogative if that's something the body wants to do.
Well, the reason I say that is because this makes sense with the orange one, from my point of view. Doesn't necessarily make sense with the yellow condition.
So Commissioner Baker, if you wanted to amend this final order, you could make a motion and we can find what the rest of the commission feels about it. But if there's not consensus to remove it, I think we can move on. So that would be the direction I would ask.
Well, if no one else wants to remove it, then I'll leave it there.
Is there any other commissioners that would like to discuss that?
Discuss the actual motion?
Taking out the
table. No.
Okay. So with that, are there other questions about the final order before we move on to the motion? Speak.
I will support the motion when it comes up, but I don't agree it ever had to be made. I'm confused on what really happened. To me, this applicant never had to file a street tree plan because I do not believe that Delta Highway is considered a street. Now, you said that LUBA didn't set a precedent because this is unique. Well, either LUBA said we overdid our authority, which I don't understand, or LUBA said that this is a street and therefore it's abutting and therefore it requires a street tree plan. If that's the case, to me, and I disagree with another commissioner, that sets a precedent because someone's going to look specifically at that, another lawyer, and say, this is what LUBA decided, that this highway was a street. So I'm confused with that. I'll support this to have this application move on because I think it should, but I'm really concerned. I don't understand why the commission initially didn't say, that doesn't even apply in this case. Irregardless of what the commissioner did, it doesn't apply because there are no abutting streets and it didn't create a street. To me, that should have cleared it all up at that point in time. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Any other discussions before we vote? All right, we're voting to approve the yellow copy final order. All those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous. Okay. Next item on the agenda is other items from commission. Go with commissioners first. Anybody have anything that they'd like to report?
Just wanted to report the moving ahead meeting that was scheduled was canceled and is going to be rescheduled, so I have nothing to report.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the reschedule.
Yeah.
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, just the Historic Review Board met, and they're looking at a number of areas for focusing on for national, I think it's called National Historic Preservation Month in May, and those include public education, surveys, designations, more designations of local designations first, Eugene designations, design guidelines, recognizing ethnic and cultural impacts, and, working on historic preservation plans for various neighborhoods. And I pass that on.
All right. Anybody else? Robin, do we have anything you want to bring up?
Oops. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Several items, actually, that I'd like to just touch base on. First of all, I sent out an email not too long before this meeting that I received Commissioner Becker's resignation. Earlier this morning, it sounds like just with scheduling conflicts that it's just become really difficult for him, I think, to participate in the planning commission in the way that he would like to, so he understands how important it is and wants to be here. So with that, we need to, at some point, find a replacement for Commissioner Becker for the duration of his term. According to the bylaws, council appoints the replacement. We've done this before. Fortunately, we actually are in an open recruitment period, so we're looking to kind of out beating the bushes right now for new planning commissioners. We have 2 positions that are open, Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Jaworski, and we'll be working through that process. Actually, planning commissioners, you guys are some of the best recruiters that we have, so if there are any contacts or folks that you know of out there in the community who would like to join, I think that would be awesome. So Commissioner Taylor, I believe that you've said you are interested in re-upping, so definitely throw your hat in the ring. That is awesome. Commissioner Jaworski, I believe you've said you will not be interested in re-upping. So we've talked about not wanting a huge send-off. We'll have to do a little something. Anyway, so that's it. That's some pretty big news. Yes.
Just a question, and I think I know the answer. Had Commissioner Becker been assigned to any subcommittees yet? I don't think he had.
We didn't get that far.
I didn't get that far.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
think so either.
I just thought if there was a hole to fill, that it would be good to bring that up, but I didn't think he had, so,
Yeah,
okay.
that's a good point.
And then the other question, and you can look into this, but you may want to check into our bylaws and see as far as representation, because I know that there are wordings as to how many planners or architects or that, and so
Real
I know that
estate
we're
and
kind
some
of
of
getting close to that limit, so if you could figure out what is appropriate to have on it, and if we're nearing that thing, you're just asking us to go recruit people. Well, don't go recruit somebody and then find out that they wouldn't be eligible if they were.
That's a really good point. We can just kick out a reference to that section of the bylaws for
Yeah.
everybody to think about. And that's something that council also needs to consider as they make their decision.
Right.
I think the other big thing for recruitment too is Elliot Becker also represented a part of the city that has not been well represented on this commission in years past, and I think in terms of our recruitment efforts, it might be helpful for us to try really hard to make sure that we recruit somebody from that area. And Eugene, again, geographic representation, neighborhoods are important, so maybe something to think about as well, because I don't think any of us live in the Bethel area, if I'm not mistaken. I'm taking silence as a yes to that. Okay.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that is, I definitely think, because just to stress that I think it's important that Planning Commission is an at-large committee. So diversity is really important, but just to clarify, we're not actually representing our neighborhoods. We're not here representing a part of the city of Eugene. It's an at-large committee, and still while saying that diversity is important, but just to make sure the public knows that we're not looking to fill certain areas of the city of Eugene for a sole purpose of representation of that area.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. There are no slots by ward or neighborhood or anything like that. But I would say that in the past couple of years, we've actually worked really hard to go out and drum up a pool of applicants that is fairly diverse. In fact, we're making a big push here in PDD to be to really boost equity in terms of being able to participate on a commission. In terms of folks that are invited and recruited to be on the commission, everything from age, geography, ethnicity, income, all those things are very important, I think, to have diversity. And citywide, as well as in PDD, we're pushing to do that. So anything you can do to help would be awesome. And I believe Alyssa's been spearheading a lot of our recruitment efforts. So if you have any ideas or thoughts, hit her up, and we'll just keep you in the loop as that goes forward. And if I learn anything new about the replacement of Commissioner Becker and how that will unfold in the context of our recruitment, I will let you know as soon as I can.
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I didn't know where to throw this into, but I was hoping to sort of ask staff. I know we're having a hearing coming up, and it's been mentioned several times, but just for some simple statistics on the number of R1 properties that would not, could allow a secondary dwelling unit on them now, given their dimensions? And so if we had a total number of lots and what percentage, could or couldn't be potentially have a secondary dwelling unit of some kind, that information might be useful for, for our deliberations, and it might be useful, to have that sort of in advance.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I had a couple other items to throw out related to the last one in terms of equity and access and how we run planning commission. You know that we've been on this new schedule for about the last 6 months, and we said we'd try it out for 6 months. And this is a schedule where before that we were having planning commission pretty regularly, and all the meetings were at 11:30 on Mondays. So we've since moved over to the schedule where we did one evening meeting and one midday meeting every month. So we just have 2 meetings a month by and large, unless we have to, for some reason, schedule another one. So I wanted to check in and see how that's going for the commission. If you want to continue that schedule, we are perfectly happy to do that.
Seems to me we've only had one Tuesday night meeting.
Yeah,
Pardon?
No, it's okay.
I think that another 6 months is worth a try, seeing how we've only done order.
I'll say the evening meetings for me personally are a lot easier. I'm not in a time in my life where I can miss a lot of work every single Monday. I like being able to pay rent. So when that changes, for sure. But in the meantime, nighttime works best for me personally. And I think it's been easier for recruitment, I'll say too. And folks I've talked to, that's an anecdote. For sure, it's not conclusive, but I will say it's been easier for me to recruit people saying that there's nighttime meetings as an option, which might be helpful.
Well, I think part of the reasoning behind it was to get more of the public involved as well, being able to come out to a meeting. And I'm not sure we've had enough evening meetings to determine if that's really working or not. So I'm good with continuing a little longer to see how it goes.
Okay. It's just I see head nods around the table. Looks like we'll go ahead and continue with that. That is a good thing. In terms of schedule, so you may have noticed that there have been a few polls come out, and we have a pretty busy schedule. I think we have 3 meetings in March. So we have our 2 regular meetings, and we have 1 additional public hearing scheduled for secondary dwellings. And let's see, April, I believe we only have the 2 regular meetings in April currently scheduled. So it looks like we have our regular meetings plus only 1 additional meeting in March at this point. Let's see, so a couple of things that are going to come your way. Of course, secondary dwellings is a big one, and that's a council directive that we have a timeline to address, of course. That's on public hearings on March 6th. March 13th, work session on affordable and missing middle housing update. And kind of let you know what the latest and greatest is on that. We have a city council meeting tonight, I believe, where we're going to be discussing that as well. We have, on that same day, on March 13th, we have a legal training, which is just a primer for quasi-judicial applications. Lauren, you're going to be running that?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, that'll be good. And then March 26th, we have deliberations and recommendation on the fairly narrow scope of what we're doing for secondary dwellings as a phase 1. April 10th, public hearing and action on the Edison Elementary School parking. And some of you may have been following that. Just to very quickly, Edison School is probably the oldest or one of the oldest schools in town, and they're looking to, 4J is looking to do a bond to do some renovations to that school, and they simply don't have the space there for the parking that would otherwise be required by our code. And so council has directed us to prepare a land use code amendment to allow renovations or reconstruction of that school with some specific requirements, basically to make it a lot easier for them to do that with a transportation demand management program, so that you can manage the parking without having to require it on site and take up room for playgrounds and open space and other stuff. So a lot of folks in the community have come out in favor in that. Council directed us to do that just recently, so that'll be coming to you as a legislative process. And we'll talk more
That's
about
quite,
that.
that's,
Sorry.
you just ex parte.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Since Robin brought up Edison,
Yeah.
you all should have received an email from me talking about the Edison amendment particularly because it is a site-specific code amendment. It is a quasi-judicial process, not a traditional legislative process like you'll be seeing with the secondary dwelling units. And so part of the March 13th discussion may kind of focus on those differences. But because Edison is quasi-judicial, you need to be cognizant of, in particular, ex-parte contacts. And it's something that is clearly important to the community, and so you may end up with folks wanting to talk to you about it, or certainly there are probably going to be news articles. And to the extent that staff will try to pay attention to those and put those news articles into the record so they then are no longer ex parte contacts, and then you don't have to worry about them. But if you come across one and want to let Alyssa know about it, that would be great, because then she will take it and place it into the record, and you don't need to disclose it later. But if folks want to talk to you about it, then that will be an ex parte contact that you either need to disclose later, or you can say, I'm sorry, this is a quasi-judicial matter, I'm on planning commission, it's going to come before me, and I can't talk to you about this.
So just enter Robin's statements there.
My statements.
Communications from staff are not ex parte contacts, so Robin's fine.
Thank you for that clarification. That's really important, because we've been thinking about it for a while as a legislative process, but it is not, because it is site-specific.
Right, it is a code amendment, but.
You got that workshop coming up.
Yeah, exactly. So just two other things I wanted to point out. As you know, we've got a lot of new projects that are coming up and that have been in the works. So we have two public involvement plans and charters coming to you. At the end of April, we'll be talking about the Urban Reserves Charter and Public Involvement Plan on April 23rd. And on that same day, we'll also be talking about the Clear and Objective Housing Standards Charter and Public Involvement Plan. So, and then we'll have other ones following that, but those are the two that are coming first.
Couple questions. Actually, I found something that should have come from commission, and this was just a thing that I found when I was reading my packet, and just for going forward when you guys are putting packets together. On page 3, it talks about the LUBA decision, and it says the planning commission might want to what we might want to consider is on page 7 of LUBA's final order, and then you go back and LUBA's pages aren't numbered. So it made it difficult for me to go, basically had to go through and read through a bunch more than, so if you could say on page 7 or page 13 of the PC packet, that was just a little small thing. Going forward to help make our volumes of reading a little bit shorter. And then the other question I had for staff was, now that the the UGB has been adopted and passed its muster. The time frame starts on a bunch of the projects that were supposed to be initiated by that.
Right.
Do you know what the process is going to be for the administrative order for the monitoring committee?
Not yet.
The makeup and the timeline, and when that committee will be getting to start it?
Yeah, I don't have details on that for you right now, but that's something that we'll want to come back and talk to you about in more detail for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the heads up on that. We can do that. Two more little things that I wanted to throw out there for you guys. One of them is that we've talked about an annual report, and we're actually working on that right now. It's in progress, so we've got a lot of the content pulled together, and we just want to give you a heads up, share that with you as soon as it's ready. We've also been working on an update to our fee schedule for our revenues for planning fee, for land use application fees, and potentially considering also other kinds of fees, for example, a technology fee. So PDD updates its fees generally every year, and a lot of other divisions, like building and permit services, do that on an annual basis. For planning, it's been a very long time. It's been, I think 2008 perhaps was the last time that we updated our fees. So it's been quite a while. So what that means is that it's time, and we're giving it a serious look. And I just wanted to give you a heads up because we'll be bringing more information forward about that here in the next couple of months.
Is there a public process for that?
Yeah, I'll bring you all the details and what the process is about that. It's actually primarily an administrative process.
Other Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, just another suggestion to, and also I want to, when we have packets like this that there are supplemental materials that aren't in the packet, like in this case, things from the record, I think it would be useful if we had a link directly in the agenda note that took you directly to that, those pages, so they aren't so difficult to find. You know what I'm saying? All the supplemental material that's not in the here, essentially the record. The other thing too is I found it difficult to navigate that material online because there's sort of, it was just by documents, and I know in the past there used to be sort of like a Dropbox site that made it a lot easier because, in order to do that, you have to kind of go to each one, and it generates a PDF file, which takes a while, and then you have to download it. I assume that those PDF files have been generated once before. If we had we have technology. It's, it shouldn't take 3 hours to download all of those files. Just as a suggestion, something to look at, see about improvement for the public. Obviously, we can request copies of things, but the public can, and if they have an interest, and we're trying to get them to be interested, the easier we can make it to get materials, the better, I think.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Last item on the agenda is, how are we doing? Anybody want to tell us how the Planning Commission's doing? Very good. That we're adjourned.
You must be doing well.
Look.